Everyone remembers the bang, but nobody pays attention to the burning fuse before it. Ask anyone when everything fell apart before World War II, and they'll tell you it was October 1929 in New York. They'll describe the chaos on Wall Street, brokers throwing themselves out of windows, and the Great Depression spreading across the globe from America. But here's the thing, they're completely mistaken. Sure, the 1929 crash was catastrophic. It destroyed fortunes and left deep scars on society, but it wasn't the final blow. Believe it or not, things actually got better in 1930. Stock markets started settling down. People began hoping the nightmare might finally be ending. The true collapse of everything didn't happen in some Manhattan high-rise. It happened in a quiet meeting room in Vienna on May 11th, 1931. It started with numbers that simply didn't match up. It started with one bank credit Anstalt. When this one financial institution went under, it did way more than just destroy people's savings. It completely shattered the entire world's financial system, made countries abandon the gold standard, and pushed Germany's middle class so far that there was no coming back. Most people think the Nazi Party rose to power because of politics, ideology, and hatred. But when you actually examine the numbers, you'll discover something completely different. The path to Stalingrad, Normandy, and Auschwitz actually started with a banking crisis in Austria. This is how one terrible loan led to a world war. To grasp how a single bank could trigger a worldwide conflict, we need to understand what Europe looked like after World War I. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, once this enormous economic powerhouse spanning Central Europe, got completely divided up by the Treaty of Versailles and the Treaty of Saint-Germain. What remained was the Republic of Austria, this tiny country with an oversized head and a withered body. Vienna was built as an imperial capital to run an empire of 50 million people. Now it was governing just 6 million people. It became a city haunted by its past, full of magnificent buildings and banks that no longer had any real function. In this emptiness, one institution dominated Austrian finance, Kreditanstalt. This was more than just a bank. It was literally Austria's entire economy dressed up in fancy business clothes. By 1931, after the government forced it to merge with failing banks, Kreditanstalt controlled almost 70% of Austria's commerce and manufacturing. It held more than half of every single bank deposit in the nation. The Rothschild family owned it, a name that symbolized old money financial security. If you were living in Vienna, you didn't just use Kreditanstalt for banking. Your employer was probably owned by them, you purchased products from their companies, and your retirement depended on whether they stayed afloat. Everyone just assumed one thing: Kreditanstalt can't possibly fail, because if it does, Austria stops existing. This weakness was hidden behind the illusion of prosperity in the late 1920s. American money was pouring into Europe, rebuilding Germany's factories and keeping Vienna running. But economists call this hot money. These were short-term loans that could be demanded back instantly, but they were being used to fund long-term projects. Think about it like borrowing a quick loan to construct a factory. As long as your lender keeps extending your deadline, everything's fine. But if your lender panics and demands their cash back immediately, while your money is literally stuck inside factory walls, you're completely broke. The system keeping this fragile money flow alive was the gold standard. Between the wars, people treated the gold standard like a sacred religion. It was the golden chains connecting all nations together. Every currency had a fixed gold value. This meant governments couldn't simply create money whenever they had problems, because every paper bill required actual gold sitting in a vault backing it up. It was meant to stop inflation and force financial discipline. In truth, it created a catastrophe waiting to happen. If a country lost investor confidence, people would withdraw their money, convert it to gold, and ship it overseas. The central bank would watch its gold reserves disappear, forcing them to increase interest rates to lure the gold back. Raising rates during a depression is like trying to heal someone bleeding out by draining more blood. It sucks away whatever life the economy has left. Everything was in place. The ground was drenched in gasoline. It just needed one tiny spark. And that spark came from a decision that seemed completely logical, even smart at the time. This leads us to the catastrophic error. In March 1931, politicians in Berlin and Vienna did some calculations. Both the German and Austrian economies were suffering. Trade barriers and tariffs were choking them to death. So Julius Kirkus, Germany's foreign minister, and his Austrian equivalent suggested a Zollunion, a customs union. They'd eliminate tariffs between these two German-speaking countries to stimulate trade. From an economic perspective, this was genius. It would reduce costs, boost efficiency, and help both countries recover. From a political standpoint, it was signing their death warrant. To France, this looked exactly like Anschluss, the forbidden merger of Germany and Austria. France, still haunted by World War I, saw any cooperation between Berlin and Vienna as preparation for another invasion. France's response was immediate, vicious, and financial. They chose to weaponize the financial markets. France started aggressively dumping short-term Austrian and German bonds. They withdrew their investments from Vienna to punish the Austrians for suggesting the customs union. Their plan was to squeeze Austria until they begged for relief and dropped the union idea. They had no idea they were removing the cornerstone holding up the entire global structure. The pressure hit instantly. Credit-Anstalt was already struggling. Weighed down by toxic debts from other banks, the government forced it to take over. When French money started fleeing, the bank's finances began bleeding out. On May 11, 1931, Credit-Anstalt revealed a loss of 140 million shillings. By today's standards, that number might seem modest. But in 1931 Vienna, it was the end of the world. The loss destroyed most of the bank's capital. The bank run started right away. It wasn't just elderly people standing in line to get their savings. It was international banks, investment funds, and entire governments desperately transferring money out of Austria. The Austrian government tried stopping the hemorrhaging. They guaranteed the bank's debts, basically betting the entire country's credit to rescue the bank. But remember those golden chains. To pay these terrified depositors, Austria's central bank had to create money. To create money, they needed gold. As they printed shillings to replace the escaping foreign capital, the ratio of gold backing each paper bill collapsed. Austria was dying. This is where tragedy becomes mechanical. In today's economy, the central bank would step in as the ultimate safety net, creating currency to flood the system and stop the panic. But under the gold standard, Austria couldn't do that without violating the global system's rules. They begged the Bank of England and the Bank of France for gold loans to stabilize the shilling. The Bank of England attempted to help, but the amount was inadequate. The French, consumed by political revenge, stalled. They insisted Austria publicly reject the customs union before they'd send even one gold bar. By the time the politicians finished arguing, the moment had passed. Austria stopped gold payments. The shilling plummeted. The infection spread beyond borders. Modern banking is a network of connections. German banks had loaned massive amounts to Austria. When Austria froze assets, German banks suddenly discovered giant holes in their own finances. Panic jumped from Vienna to Berlin within weeks. The Danette Bank, one of Germany's biggest, suffered a bank run and failed in July 1931. The German government, terrified of repeating the hyperinflation disaster of 1923, refused to create money. Instead, Chancellor Heinrich Brüning enforced crushing austerity. He increased taxes and slashed wages while banks were falling apart. The outcome was economic destruction that modern society can barely imagine. As Germany's banking sector collapsed, credit completely disappeared. Factories making profits one day shut down the next because they couldn't secure loans for basic materials. Unemployment in Germany didn't rise gradually, it skyrocketed vertically. It jumped from reasonable numbers to 6 million unemployed almost overnight. The middle class, which had barely rebuilt after losing everything in the 1920s, got wiped out for the second time in 10 years. This is history's turning point. Before this crash, the Nazi Party was loud but controllable fringe movement. They were actually losing steam as the economy had improved in the late 20s. But the 1931 banking collapse transformed Germany's psychological landscape completely. The average German looked at the establishment, the moderate leaders. The international financiers, those enforcing the Treaty of Versailles, saw nothing but failure and betrayal. They saw a system that valued gold rules more than their children's survival. When the global financial system turned its back on Germany, Germany turned its back on the system. The collapse forced Britain to drop the gold standard in September 1931. Shock that destroyed whatever trust remained in global trade. Countries closed themselves off. They built enormous tariff barriers, desperately trying to save their crumbling industries. World trade dropped by 2/3. This killed the liberal economic order. In these ruins, the Nazi message suddenly made sense. Hitler didn't just sell hatred, he sold self-sufficiency. He claimed Germany could never be secure while its economy relied on French bankers' moods or American stock market swings. He insisted Germany needed to be completely self-reliant, protected from international finance chaos. And since Germany didn't have the raw materials for self-sufficiency inside its borders, the economic logic demanded expansion. The pursuit of Lebensraum, living space, was partly an economic strategy created by the trauma of the 1931 credit crisis. If you can't buy oil and wheat because the banking system collapsed, you conquer the territories that have oil and wheat. Germany's democratic center collapsed alongside its banks. By 1932, the Nazis became the biggest party in the Reichstag. The banking crisis accomplished what passionate speeches in beer halls never could. It confirmed the extremist belief that the existing system was designed for failure. Kreditanstalt collapse proved to Germans that international rules were deliberately stacked against them. When money collapses, politics turns violent. When we examine this chain reaction, Austria, then Germany, then Britain, then everywhere, we witness the frightening speed of financial infection. It took under 6 months to transform a recession into the Great Depression. The invisible threads of debt connecting us all, when they break, they lash back with enough power to destroy empires. The lesson from the fatal customs union mistake in France's revenge shows the danger of turning finance into a warfare tool. France wanted to punish Austria politically. They accidentally destroyed the economic barrier that was keeping Hitler powerless. This story feels disturbingly relevant today. We're living through sovereign debt crises, banking infections, and hot money flooding emerging markets. We watch nations today using the SWIFT banking network and economic sanctions as political weapons, freezing money to force political changes. We see a globalized economy that runs efficiently but breaks, easily optimized for maximum profit but lacking backup plans. We assume because we have central banks that can create money, we're protected from 1931's chaos. But panic psychology hasn't evolved. The structure of excessive debt hasn't changed. Kreditanstalt collapse shows us that no banking failure is purely technical. Money is fundamentally a trust system, and trust forms the foundation of peace. When Vienna's banks shut their doors, the social agreement shattered. People realized their leaders had lost control of the survival machinery. The real tragedy is that World War II wasn't destined to happen. It wasn't fate. It was accidentally created by serious professionals in business suits who thought they were simply managing finances and winning diplomatic victories. They believed the gold standard mattered more than keeping society stable. They believed economic suffering would teach political lessons. Instead, it taught the world that when economies collapse, the monsters lurking in the shadows don't just emerge. They get invited in with enthusiasm. History doesn't exactly repeat itself, but it echoes. And if you pay close attention to today's creaking sovereign debt markets, to the debates over tariffs and trade conflicts, you might hear the faint haunting echo of Vienna in 1931. If you want to discover where this echo leads next, you know what to do?